Hello, everybody. Everybody doing wonderful this evening? All right, we're going to pick up where we left off in the character unit. And we're talking about positive character or character in general in the home. And we did, in the last class, we talked a bit about problems that could be at home. And this is a very important topic to cover because it is in society, it can be a very difficult topic to cover too, especially depending on the crowd that you're talking to, because it is a very, very, very common thing, especially in today's society, for there to be serious problems at home. And you, if you talk to anybody that's grown up and you ask them if they had a normal childhood, most of them can't say, "Oh, I've had a normal childhood," and that's simply because positive character hasn't been really taught in society today. So society has a lot of very messed up situations in the home. And if you think about it, you really can't expect a society who hasn't been taught positive character to understand how to raise people from complete dependency to properly functioning members of society in any appropriate manner. It's simply impossible. So as a result, we have very, very rough childhoods for a lot of young people. People who are raised in very less than ideal situations. And you have to remember that when you're dealing with students, because it can be very easy to strike a nerve or to hit a very sore spot with people when you bring up these topics that are just the simple black and white of how things should be and how things shouldn't be. But more than likely, and I would go as far as to say every single time that you're discussing specifically this chapter in the character unit with students, you're going to be talking to people who are experiencing exactly what you are talking about. And when I say that, I'm talking about abuse, be it physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. And these things are going on in the home and among when they're children, when they're growing up. And as a result, what occurs, they also don't understand how to properly raise children because they know what they've been taught by the way they were raised, and the cycle repeats itself and repeats itself. And our job is to help break that cycle by explaining to them or explaining to society why these things are wrong, how they're wrong, and how they can be resolved, how they can be repaired. So just remember that when you're going through this chapter, and keep this in mind throughout this class. Because it is a very touchy subject, but it's an extremely necessary subject to cover, but you have to be careful how you cover it. So keep that in mind. I'm sure many of us who are in this class today, and many of y'all watching, would look back at your childhood and say, okay, I have great memories, I have bad memories, I have things that I can remember that are plain, that were wrong. And I can remember certain examples of abuse, whether outright or subtle, because you got to remember, most of society has not been trained in how to properly raise people. So it's a given that that's going to occur, sadly. So we talked about physical abuse, where somebody is literally getting physically hurt. Emotional and verbal abuse. And this is a very, very powerful one, because a lot of times people can be being abused without realizing it by being conditioned in certain ways, being spoken to in certain ways, and then when they grow older and have to deal with society, they have all these traumas and things that they didn't realize that they had that they now have to deal with in order to be a functioning member of society. And that can be very difficult. And a lot of times the parents don't even realize that what they're doing is abuse. So it's a very messed up situation if you think about it as a big picture, because a lot of times the parents are doing what they think is best for their kids and their children, not realizing that what they're doing is actually very detrimental and hurting the children. It might be the way they were raised or the way they were taught to raise children. So it's a very messed up system that we're trying to deal with here. So we have emotional and verbal abuse. And it can be something as blatant as "you're so stupid, you can't do anything right," as is shown in the picture on page 38. Or it can be things that are more subtle. There was somebody who I really looked up to who often made the statement, "My parents never told me I was stupid, but they sure know how to make me feel like I was stupid." So if you ask the parents, they would be like, "Oh no, I've never ever abused my children verbally." But through the way that they interacted with them, it came across in their behavior, in the way that they talked to them. So, and like I said, it might not have even been an intentional thing, but these are the kind of things that go on. So what can we do about it? We had some case studies that we talked about on page 40 and 41, some statistics. And here's some cold, hard facts on page 42. And I'm just going to go ahead and briefly cover the ones that were covered and then get into the last few here. It says long-term effects of child abuse include fear, anxiety, depression, anger, hostility, inappropriate sexual behavior, a poor concept of themselves, and difficulty forming relationships. Something you have to realize as parents and as children being raised up in this environment. Just because you're a child doesn't mean you're not mentally mature enough to understand these concepts. That way, when you grow up and have children or raise a family or are involved in relationships in general, you also know how to behave and how to treat people in these relationships. A parent is pretty much the first line of anything, first line of defense, first line of communication, first line of influence when a child is being raised up. It's the first people that they interact with, the first people that they meet, the first people that they can open up to and talk to because they're their parents. If those people who they put their unconditional trust in are abusing them or are doing anything to hurt them, be it mentally, physically, emotionally, etc., that's how they're going to they can feel like that's how it's supposed to be. There's nothing that we can really do about it. This is just how life is, which it shouldn't be. And that's just how they go on living the rest of their lives, just kind of following that same pattern of footsteps. Or they grow up very bruised and damaged because of it, and they don't know how to function with other people in society because of the way that they were treated by the people who they were supposed to be able to trust. So it's very, very dangerous. So that's why it says they can possibly have a poor concept of themselves, difficulty forming relationships, an endless list of what society would classify as disorders that could result from a dysfunctional family life. Adults who viewed domestic violence in the home as children have a greater difficulty staying employed and are more likely to have mental problems. And that's why I said even you who are young, who may be going through this right now. Maybe you're witnessing fights at home or, just a very unpleasant environment. That does not make you a bad person, and that does not mean that you have to continue this cycle. The best thing for you to do at this point would be to understand what's going on, that it's not right, and look for solutions in your own life as to how you can stop that cycle and prevent it from occurring and continuing. If you're in the position as parents where you might not realize as parents, because we've seen a lot, we've gone through a lot in the world, so these things might not be as harsh to us. We might have, a fight with our spouse or something, and maybe there's harsh words being exchanged, cursing, maybe throwing things, and we've grown up fighting with our siblings and things like that, so it seems okay to us. Remember, you have a little kid who's also watching you and is traumatized and in fear in the corner or whatever it might be because their parents are fighting. That's a very crazy thing to really realize when you look at it like that. They haven't seen all those experiences that you may have, so they're not as mentally dead or desensitized to the whole aspect of the people who are supposed to be guiding them fighting with each other. That's very, very dangerous for a child to experience and witness. So remember that those of you who are in the position of authority figures in your home or parents, it's not, first of all, it's not okay for y'all to be fighting. You all need to come to an agreement. But also exposing a child to this is raising them up in a very, very crazy way. And I'm not condemning anybody or saying that you're bad people. But this is the kind of thing that occurs in society today. And all of us have experienced it or witnessed it at some point, sadly. Every year, over 1,400, it says here, but this is 1,740 as of late, children die due to abuse. That's over 4 children a day. Now that's lose their life, meaning something occurred in the home, be it a ridiculous form of discipline or whatever it might have been that the parents thought that they were doing, or blatant abuse, where children are abused for whatever reason, and resulted in a child's death. That's very serious, and that's a real thing that occurs every single day. The United States Advisory Board reported that due to abuse, there are over 18,000 children permanently disabled every year. This isn't birth defects. This isn't everyday accidents that occur. This is abuse. Tens of thousands of victims deal with psychological trauma. As adults, many turn to domestic violence or become abusers themselves. And that's what I was talking about, the cycle continuing over and over again. And that's why it's important to learn these things so that we understand how to break that cycle and we can take the actions necessary to stop that from occurring in our lives and in the future lives that we are bringing into the world. Girls as well as boys are sexually molested and vice versa. Boys as well as girls. Everybody can be sexually molested in these abusive relationships. So a lot of times one gender or another is sort of I'm sure we've all seen or heard where somebody was sort of brushed to the side like, oh, you're probably misunderstanding something or this didn't really occur. But no, when these things are reported or when something like this is witnessed or seen or something is said, it needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be taken seriously. Children whose parents abuse drugs or alcohol have a greater opportunity of being emotionally, physically, and sexually abused. Why? These things impair your ability to think clearly. Drugs, alcohol abuse impair your ability to think clearly. Now, I often say, why would you want to do anything that would impair the most important organ in your body from working properly? You literally need it to think and make decisions, and your decisions run your life. Why would you take a substance that inhibits that ability? So it's obviously more likely for this abuse to take place because you're having fun, maybe you're high or whatever it might be, something occurs that you don't agree with or that you're upset about, so you take that anger out on the child, or your emotions are cloudy and you do things that you might not even realize that you're doing or you might not even do otherwise. You know, anybody who's experienced a drunk parent or witnessed drunk parents and the way they behave know it can be pretty outrageous. Very outrageous. And I'm not going to go into any details, but anybody who's experienced it can explain the details. It can get very, very, very terrible. So in another statistic that I have written down here, which I recommend that you write down, is children who are abused are 9 times more likely to get involved in criminal activity. Because if you're in this abusive relationship, you're trying to do things to get out of this abusive relationship. Maybe you're trying to get out on your own. You're also trying to block your mind away from it. You get involved in things that are dangerous. Or you simply were not raised in a way to where you know how to survive properly in society, and things end up getting done that are not legal. So being in this home, especially if you're somebody who can provide the home for somebody, meaning you're a parent, and are providing this environment, provide a healthy environment for your children. Go out of your way to provide a healthy environment for your children because they need it. Just like you needed a healthy environment growing up, whether you got a healthy environment or not growing up. You know, you can't go back and repair that situation except coming to terms with it in your own mind and making sure that you are not doing this to your own children. As teachers, because that's what we're all here learning about, is learning to teach this program, you can also bring this same abusive mentality into your relationship with your students. I want you to think about that because we're training teachers here. So if you're in an environment where you're dealing with children or you're dealing with other students, you go out and you have to teach a class, be a positive teacher. Emulate what you're teaching. And, you know, in the parenting manual, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll get to at some point, if you have that book and are able to look at it, at the beginning of the book, which describes abusive relationships, it goes into a lot more detail on what these abusive relationships entail with children. And it talks about things like yelling, hitting, and everything else that are described as abusive behavior. Understand those things and be sure that you're not doing them when you're dealing with your children and also when you're a teacher. Okay, let's go over to page 43 here. We have 2 scenarios or 2 stories. Real stories, by the way, not fabricated stories. About children who were abused. Of course, the names have been changed to protect their privacy. Now, it says, let's read this one about Ricky first. It says, for the first 11 years of Ricky's life, he didn't know what it felt like to be loved. As a baby, he was sent to one babysitter after the next. As he got older, his mother would leave him for long periods of time by himself, often without food. There were nights when Ricky's mother stayed all night at a local bar. When she was home, she was high on cocaine. By the time Ricky was 9, he started hanging out with a gang of boys and eventually stopped coming home. One night, he and another gang member mugged an old woman. While trying to get her bag, Ricky pushed her and she fell and broke her hip. Ricky was arrested and sent to a juvenile detention center. So, you can see from this story here how the way his home environment obviously was not ideal, far from ideal. So, in order for him to feel accepted, to feel loved, to feel like he had a group of people that actually cared about him, which the gang provided, he turned to criminal activity. Think about that. Are you providing the right kind of environment for your home to where they don't feel like they need to look elsewhere for the concern, the care and concern, the respect that they should be getting at home? Because look at this. He didn't know what it felt like to be loved for the first 11 years of his life. That's the foundation of his life, pretty much. That's the foundation. That's where he learns how to talk, how to read, how to walk, how to write, how to do all the basic things that he needs to learn in life. All that time, he didn't feel like he was loved. He wasn't respected, because love is a part of respect. So in order to feel that love, to feel that appreciation, he looked elsewhere. Somewhere that was offering it readily was a gang. And so many young people join gangs for this very reason. And get involved in criminal activity. Or they just get involved with the wrong crowd because they don't feel like it's available at home. Okay, let's read the next one here about Shante. Shante's parents divorced 2 years ago. Since then, Shante's mother remarried a man who turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. And that's another thing, too, about these relationships that don't work out. You know, I've seen so many scenarios where parents split up and the children are left in the middle. What can the children do? It wasn't their fault, but as a result, they're torn between two different parents and trying to figure out what they're doing with their life. And that can really mess with a child's head growing up. So this is what we have in this situation. They divorced. Her mother remarried a man who turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. When he came home from work already drunk, he would beat her mother and curse Shante and her sister. One night, as he physically abused her mother, Shante tried to stop him. He knocked Shante against a wall. Not too long after that, he sexually molested her. Since that incident, Shante barely talks to anyone, not even at school. Her grades have fallen and she's been sent to the principal's office several times for detention. Now, somebody on the outside looking in at this situation that doesn't have the details and isn't interested enough in helping the child enough to seek the details, of course, if they're in a position of authority to do so, would see Shante as what kind of person? Maybe a kid who is a loner, who is troublesome, who's causing all kind of problems in school, right? Remember, she got sent to the detention's office. Her grades fell. Maybe she's not taking school seriously. I'm talking about from a person who doesn't have this whole story here. Let's say you're a teacher in the school, and you're looking at it from this angle. You see her as somebody who is maybe doesn't take school seriously, causing problems in class. Maybe sits back in class, doesn't talk to anybody, causes problems, doesn't do her work. This is what you're seeing. But there's a whole other situation going on, and this is not the problem. This is a consequence of the problem. That's what you have to realize when you're dealing with young people. Okay, they didn't hop out of the womb a problem child. This is occurring because of something else. So, and of course you can't go immediately and blaming, I bet you there's abuse going on at home. No, but that is a very possible, in today's society, scenario. In this scenario, it was some horrible abuse going on. She got raped, her mother was getting abused, and she has to deal with all of that. And in a situation where there's no communication in the family, nobody that she feels like she can talk to, she might feel like it's her fault. for whatever reason, because these are the kind of things, as a child, you're trying to put all this stuff together, and you come to some crazy conclusions, especially when you don't have people that you can talk to and communicate with. Sometimes in these situations, if you talk to somebody else about it, you'll get beat more because this is a family issue and you're not supposed to talk about it. And that's all part of the abuse. It's a crazy situation to be in, and a crazy situation to understand how to get out of. So her grades have fallen and she's been sent to the principal's office several times for detention. She's easily angered and has become aggressive with her peers and teachers. So, you as a teacher in this situation, think of how you would handle it. You don't know all the rest of this scenario here. You see Shantae here being aggressive with other students. She's maybe breaking things and causing all kinds of problems in your eyes. So to you, she's a crazy person who's just doing all kinds of things. As a teacher, an authority figure in this scenario, you can make that situation 100 times worse, or you can actually start to help that situation based on how you handle it. Is everybody following what I'm saying here? Because you're to a child, a teacher, especially if that teacher is doing everything they're supposed to and respecting their students, is seen as somebody that they can look up to. Maybe sometimes the children even come to you with scenarios or things that are going on and they confide in you. And we have a principal here too. So by dealing with them as a problem child, you can drive them further into depression, further into self-abuse and everything else, to the point to where they might end their own life. Or to the point to where they start acting out even worse in order to get that attention that they feel like they need. They're looking for attention, obviously, and they don't know how to get the right attention because they're in an environment where the only attention they get is negative. So you could also veer that in the right direction by taking it to the proper authorities. And of course, you have to be careful there too, because if you take it to the improper authorities, you could end up in a worse situation. So you got to be very careful as a teacher when you're dealing with these very, very sensitive situations. Because in so many other cases, if you send her to the wrong authorities, they might go straight to her parents. And then you have the parents who are going to take it right back out on her, and it's just going to be an endless cycle. You have to think about all these things when you're dealing with these situations as a teacher. And you have to use the STOP acronym. Sometimes you have to do a lot of thinking and weighing out your options before you come to the best right decision. So, how did Ricky and Shantae's experiences help to develop a negative character? And here in the teacher's manual it says, influences of negativity begin to control their behavior. Now, what are influences? They come from the environment that you're in, right? It's anything that can affect the way you think, feel, and act. In this situation, Ricky was being exposed to cocaine. She was being exposed to a drunk mom, a mom who was spending a lot of time at the bar, going through all kinds of situations, maybe, possibly, it doesn't say here, but bringing random guys home who are also doing drugs, and it could have been just a very horrible environment at home, obviously. And he was just the kid crying in the corner, trying to, find him a can of tuna and eat something for the night so that he could carry on to the next day. So those influences influenced him negatively, and he ended up going through that same cycle of negative behavior. With Shantae, those negative influences were kind of forced on her, and she was even raped as a kid. And those negative influences began to affect her behavior. What were some of the negative character traits they developed? They became aggressive, disrespectful, violent, hateful, dishonest, and unforgiving. So looking at it from this page itself paints a really decent picture of the reason that you might see a child who is displaying these negative traits. Looking at it from one shallow angle, you could say this child is an aggressive, disrespectful, violent, hateful, dishonest, and unforgiving child. He's just a hellion. He's a bad person, a rebel, and everything else. And you can treat him based on that mentality and drive him further into this behavior. Or you could deal with him based on these same traits, aggressive, disrespectful, violent, hateful, and accentuating the positive like we learned in chapter 1 here. Remember, the way you get rid of negative character is by accentuating the positive. Don't accentuate the negative. It says on page 21, accentuate the positive. So this is for somebody to do in their personal lives in order to get rid of negative character and build positive character. And as a teacher, you can be a catalyst in this process by accentuating the positive. Finding the positive in somebody, working on those positives. Remember, throughout their life with this abuse, they're not getting the positives highlighted. Okay, every little negative thing that they do is being highlighted. They're a bad person for it. They're being abused. They're the problem. In their mind, they're the reason for all this abuse. They're the reason for their mom and dad splitting up. They're the reason for this. They probably deserve getting raped and all this other stuff. And I'm not saying this to be cynical. These are the kind of things that go through a young person's mind when they're in this kind of situation. Think of that, to where they feel like they deserve to get raped. Does anyone deserve to get raped? Hell no. But in a situation like that, where the abuse is going on, there's so much confusion in that situation where it feels like the viable thought process. That's terrible. That's disturbing. That's disgusting. So, by being the teacher, and I'm not saying that you have to go in and try to be a father figure or a mother figure to that child. That might not be your place or your job. But you could be more to that child than the mother or the father ever would have been by being that positive teacher, that positive influence who accentuates the positive, looks for it. It might be a lot of work when you're dealing with an aggressive, disrespectful, violent, hateful, dishonest, unforgiving person to find positive. But there are positive things, and if you can break through that shell, which is oftentimes just a front because they don't know how to deal with themselves in society, and you find a very caring, frightened, scared person who's gone through all kinds of things, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate this thing we call life. So by finding the positive and then accentuating that positive, meaning you're dealing with and emphasizing, accentuate means to emphasize, the positive, you can start to build those positive character traits. Start to build those positive building blocks in your students. And that's how you start turning that situation around from a negative situation to positive situation. And there's still going to be years of trauma and all kinds of things that society now classifies as disorders, mental disorders, and they'll give you a pill and you won't be better. But, and as a result, these things are just sort of brushed to the side because society doesn't know how to properly deal with them. So you can start to actually turn these things around, and you'll be more of a help to that child than anybody would by actually trying to help the situation instead of just seeing them as another problem. So as teachers, remember that. Without the positive character trait of forgiveness, and that's something that, remember, you're accentuating the positive. You have to build this positive character trait of forgiveness in those children as a positive, peaceful solution teacher. Because they might not understand how to do that. In fact, they might hate their parents with a passion. I've heard some go as far as to say they wanted to kill their parents, which is a totally understandable thought process in a situation where they've been abused all of their life. You can't expect anything positive to come out of that. So if you're going to hear things like that. I'm saying some pretty crazy, outlandish things, but you're going to hear things like that, I guarantee you. You're going to hear things like that. You're going to see things like that. You're going to experience things like that as peaceful solution teachers. And you can't, it would be wrong. It would be inappropriate for you to freak out at that point and say, oh, no, you're a bad person. You need, go away. No. And that's what so many schools do. When these things start getting brought up, and now kids are opening up, oh, there's a forum where I can talk about the problems that I'm experiencing. I'm getting abused at home. Oh, shoot, shut that down immediately. This is too much for us to handle. The school, the people who are supposed to be raising them, doesn't want to talk about it anymore because serious, real problems start coming out. So these are the things that you're going to experience. Be ready for that. So unless they're able to develop this trait of forgiveness, they will continue to be bitter people. They may continue making bad choices, ending up in worse trouble. They may become like the very people who caused harm to them. In fact, it's guaranteed that they will, unless they get some sort of positive intervention. And hopefully you will be able to be enough positive intervention for them by providing them with these positive traits, this positive knowledge to help them. And I'm not saying you have to go in and be a full-fledged therapist and be their father figure or mother figure that they didn't have. Your job as a teacher is to instill these positive traits in them, to give them the knowledge and the tools that they need to make the choices to turn their life around because they didn't have them before. So that's a great stopping point, excuse me. I'm going to turn it over to the next teacher. Please, everybody, give him a round of applause to get into what a healthy family is like. On page 44, Mr. Krause.
Hello, everyone. Great to see everybody again. Let's go ahead and turn over to LP2D. I'll be picking up on page 44 here in a moment, but we're gonna go ahead and go over this next step that we're gonna get into. And it says in number 5, it says, tell students that just as dysfunctional families foster negative character, that word foster means to promote or nurture negative character, healthy families help to build and support the growth and development of positive character. Through education in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, every member of a family can be helped. Okay? Now, keep that in mind too, because a lot of times when you think of education, you think children. Okay, or your focus is on the young people a lot of times. But don't forget, this can help every member of the family. Our goal is to help mothers, fathers, and children, not just the children. Okay, everybody needs to work together. We've got to find a way to help each individual in the family. Okay, so it can help every member. Because remember, it goes back a few classes. Remember we talked about that. Even the abuser is a victim. Okay? It says, have students turn to section on pages 44 through 46 in their handbook entitled, What is a Healthy Family? And have students read the various characteristics of a healthy family. Explain that the average family has some healthy qualities and some problems. And guide class feedback by asking, how many people are in your family? You can ask these questions as you're going through the lesson here on page 44. And take as many answers as time permits. And then ask them, do you get along all the time? You know, ask them if they always get along so you can get that feedback. And you'll find out the answer is most likely going to be no, right? Unless they're in a perfect family that I still haven't met yet. Personally, I haven't seen one. I haven't had anybody say that they always got along. So let's turn over to page 44 now and read what is a healthy family. It says there are many dysfunctional families where there is child abuse, alcoholism, and substance abuse, but there are equally as many families that are loving and all members are respectful to each other. However, in most families today, there are many conflicts. Now, important to know what a conflict is. You know, a conflict, it's another one of those things another one of those words that sometimes gets misused or misdefined, you might say. A conflict is just a disagreement between, one or more people. Sometimes you can have a conflict with yourself in your own mind, right? Your mind is going back and forth on a subject. But I've also seen the Vietnam War called a conflict. It was called the Vietnam conflict. And I'm like, well, that wasn't really a conflict. That was a full-blown war. People were actually getting killed, okay? I think something like 59,000 Americans lost their lives in that war. So remember what a conflict is. Remember to use the definitions you find in the Peaceful Solution. So there's a lot of conflicts in families. So conflicts don't mean there's wars. It just means there's disagreements. The average family consists of anywhere between 2 to 5 people. And although they all share many character and physical traits, conflicts exist due to each person's individual qualities. And I'll get into that in just a second. But it says the average family is 2 to 5 people. I did a little digging to figure out what's the largest family that they have recorded in America, right? And would you believe it's 19 children? It's the Duggar family in Arkansas. They have a website, actually. They have 19 children, okay? Not grandchildren. They got a ton of grandchildren, too, but they have 19 children. But that's not the largest family. The largest family, it says, was in Russia. It was a guy, his name was Fyodor Vasily in Russia. His wife had 69 children. Now get this. She had 16 sets of twins. No, wait, hold on. Yeah, 16 twins, 7 triplets, and 4, what do they call that, quadruplets? Sets of 4? 69 children. Can you imagine that? That's a small village in your house. I'm sure you'd have to have quite a few huts there, or whatever they live in there in the north there in Russia. But this was back in the early, I think it was in the early 1900s. But families can be very large too. It could be very small but very large. Now it says the average family consists of 2 to 5 people. Although they all share many character and physical traits, it says the conflicts exist due to each person's individual qualities. Okay, so now some of those qualities might be positive qualities, and there's still conflicts. Have you ever been in a classroom where you had students that always were polite to the teacher, and like, say, for instance, they had the quality of always being polite, yes ma'am, yes sir, always raised their hand when they had a question, followed the rules of the classroom, and then other children bullied them and picked on them because they followed the rules. Even though they had great qualities, positive qualities, there was conflicts, okay? Because some people didn't appreciate those positive qualities. So it's not just negative qualities that cause conflicts at times in homes. It says, siblings argue and parents often disagree openly on many subjects, which is really a no-no. I remember hearing an older gentleman, a very wise man, saying that when his parents had disagreements, they didn't air them in front of the children. They would go somewhere alone and they would talk these things out, and they would work problems out away from the children, because children shouldn't be seeing these kind of things, because it breeds in them disrespect, where they think that they too can treat mom or dad a certain way because they see mom or dad arguing with one another. So then they think they can argue with each other as well, or possibly disagree or disrespect that parent. And then siblings arguing. We always hear about, well, it's normal. Brothers and sisters are going to argue, right? It's normal for brothers and sisters to fight. Is it? Is it normal? No, just because it takes place all the time doesn't mean it's normal. It just means that it takes place all the time. It takes place quite frequently, but only because of the lack of the moral training, right, with families. So the difference between a healthy family that's been trained or have trained themselves in moral character and a dysfunctional one is that in a healthy family, all family members are given the love, respect, and support that's needed to develop moral character traits. Let's take some time to look at that word love. I'd like you to circle that word. Okay, go ahead and circle that word, because I know it's been mentioned in other classes. In one, I think it's in the self-control unit that of the peaceful solution one day, hopefully we'll get to. It says that true lasting love is the principles of moral character that you're learning in the Peaceful Solution Character Education program. So, in other words, let's look at that a little closer. So love would be, let's turn over to let's say just page 14. Turn back to page 14 real quick. And just let's take a couple of these positive traits and let's talk about love. Love is, because we just heard it was practicing these principles that we're learning. Love is respectful. Love is respectful. That means that love means that we value others as important as ourselves. So that also means that we have to love ourselves, right? And if we love ourselves, that means we value ourselves as important, and we allow that to show through the way we treat ourselves. Do we eat healthy? Do we put things that are unhealthy into our bodies? Do we ingest drugs? Do we, illegal drugs? Do we overdrink? Do we do, these different things to, and we will say we love ourselves, but our actions prove otherwise when we do those things, because it brings harm to our bodies and our minds when we do these things. But it says respectful means to value others as important as yourself. And then love is patient, because patience says demonstrating self-control and remaining calm when things, through setbacks or when things don't go as planned, These are all things that when we practice them, when we do them, we actually demonstrate love with somebody else and even with ourselves. Okay? Being respectful, being patient, being honest. Think about it. I've, even in my past, I've said, I've used that word love very frequently. But I was doing things to show people I really didn't love them, like stealing from them and doing things like that. Being honest shows that you love somebody, because you'll never take something from them. You won't lie to them. You'll be honest in all your dealings. That's love. So when we use the word love in the peaceful solution, make sure you think about these positive character traits, like being thankful, forgiving people, not holding grudges. That's love. Okay? Being steadfast and persistent, meaning not giving up when you're determined not to give up on a positive goal that you've set. That's love. Okay, these all are principles of love, and we need to remember these when we use this word. Let's go back to page 44. When we hear that word love used in the peaceful solution, because it's not a wishy-washy thing. It's not some, and some people don't even like to use the word love. I've met a lot of people that said, some people have to hear somebody tell them all the time, I love you, I love you, I love you, just to, make sure that person loves them. But I've met people that say, you know what, I don't like to say it, I like to show it by my actions. Okay? And I can appreciate that, because that's what true love is. Remember, actions speak louder than words. Okay? So it says, in families educated in positive moral character, which there's not a lot. There's not a lot. You see the chaos in Washington, D.C. today? Why is there chaos? Why are both sides, why do we have this fighting? It's because of the lack of the moral education. Two wrongs never make a right. It's never going to work. Okay? All we're going to see is we're always going to see these negative consequences that come from the fighting and the warring and the striving. It's never going to bring a great result, ever. We've got to learn, and we've been to Washington, D.C. quite a few times. And so it's heartbreaking to see the things that are taking place. And I think a young woman even lost her life today. That wasn't necessary. None of these things are necessary, but this is the importance, and we tried to get that across to the leaders in Washington, D.C., how important the Peaceful Solution Program is to teach in the schools, so people don't have this idea that war and fighting and dishonesty and other things are going to be the way to solve their problems. It's never going to solve your problems. It's always going to make it worse. So in families educated in positive moral character, appropriate affection is shown to all members. Appropriate affection. Okay, it says, in other words, it is appropriate for members of a family to display true love and concern, which we just went over, congratulations, appreciation, and sometimes a loving hug. Look up at that picture there. You see the two parents, both being affectionate with their children. That guy's got some big mitts. I mean, I need glasses, and these fingers look like, are those fingers or, yeah, those fingers. Some big mitts. Just saying, I mean. Okay, so in other words, It's appropriate for members of a family to display true love and concern, congratulations, appreciation, and sometimes a loving hug. This is not to be confused with the inappropriate touch of sexual molestation that David was talking about. An appropriate touch does not cause you to feel uncomfortable. Okay? And, in the earlier units of the Peaceful Solution, way back in like first grade unit, it talks about appropriate touch. Okay? And the children learn at a young age what those things actually are. But if you weren't brought up in moral character, it can be confusing at times. Sometimes you don't know when you're being touched inappropriately. Sometimes you do. Okay? I know I wasn't brought up in the Peaceful Solution in my life, but sometimes I was not touched appropriately, and it made me feel very creepy. Creeped me out, scared me. I didn't want to be, I knew when something was not right. Okay? And I'm not saying that went on in my family. What I'm saying is, when I was young, certain things occurred, and I knew when, I felt uncomfortable. Okay? And if somebody ever does that, we need to train the students to make sure you tell a trusted authority figure what's taking place. And if it's somebody in your own family doing it, you might need to go outside the family to do that. It says, an appropriate touch does not cause you to feel uncomfortable. Children from families educated in positive morals know that family members can be trusted not to abuse or molest them in any way. In these families, children communicate their needs to parents in positive ways. Children also respond to their parents with respect. Now, I remember watching a movie years and years ago about a man, I think his name was Gandhi. He was a leader in India. I remember it showed when he came home from work, his children actually would meet him at the door and fall on their knees and greet him. They had so much respect for their dad. And I thought, wow. It was really amazing, but we should show honor and respect. I'm not saying you need to fall down when they come in the house, but I'm saying we need to show that honor and respect to the adults. And I know in some places that's still and even in Mexico right now, in old Mexico, children actually stand when their teachers enter the classroom. Okay, that's something that's still ingrained in them. They show that honor and respect to the adults and to the teachers. But it needs to be taught. It's something that needs to be taught. It says, members of the family verbally express their care and concern for each other by saying, I love you, or I appreciate you. Other verbal courtesies, such as please, thank you, and I apologize, are frequently used in everyday interactions. And that word courtesies, it just means being polite behavior, or polite gesture, or polite remark. In these families, the use of kind words is valued. These parents teach by example that name-calling, teasing, and insults rob others of their self-worth. And David touched on it, that, a lot of parents might say, well, I've never abused my child. I've never, because they sometimes equate abuse with physically laying your hands on somebody and, physically abusing them with your hands, or with a belt, or with a rod or something like that. But the abuse can be just the comments, like he said, the comments, the put downs, or, the name calling. There was a name I used to get called when I was young that I really, really did not like. It was embarrassing to me. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what it was. I don't think I will. But when I heard it, I was just like, it made me cringe. And the person that did it, they did it because they did it out of affection. Okay? But to me, it was like, I didn't like to hear it. I didn't want it said, especially around my friends, right? I didn't want them to hear somebody call me Willy Willy Wahoo. Oh man, I said it. Now it's out. I don't mind if you, yeah, I do. Don't say it. Okay, but that's what I used to hear all the Willy Willy Wahoo. And then when your friends are around, it's like, oh, come on, no. I remember also, I remember an incident long, long ago that occurred in my neighborhood where a certain young man used to still wet his bed when he was eight years old. And one day he was walking home from school with his friends, and his sheet was hanging out of his window with a big, big round stain on the sheet. And the friends looked at him like, is that your sheet? I remember a little boy, I'm talking about abuse. I remember a little boy in first grade that the same boy, he wet his bed, and the first grade teacher, in front of the whole class, said, somebody wets their bed. And then came to the person that wet their bed and said, it's you, in front of all the students. That was what David was talking about. As teachers, we got to be very careful, because and this lady was probably 75 or 76 years old. She's an older lady. Okay, she'd probably been teaching for many, many years. But sometimes, you know, I don't know if we sometimes think we can shame people into behaving or not doing something that we don't want them to do, or, you know, but that doesn't work. I mean, that's very embarrassing for a child. That can actually leave lifelong emotional scars in a young person just by something like that. So we got to be very careful. Remember, sometimes abuse isn't just physical. It can be words that are spoken, etc. Okay, so it says, in these families, I'm at the bottom paragraph, physical and mental health are also valued. Therefore, the abuse of alcohol or drugs is discouraged. There's open discussions and positive communication about the dangers of illegal drugs and the abuse of alcohol. Some families explore alternatives to the use of legal drugs. And this would be talking about the study. They study and use herbs and other natural substitutes to relieve the symptoms of common ailments. Rather than running to, the drugstore, some people would like to use alternative forms of healing like herbs, etc. But the abuse of alcohol, it says, let's talk about that too, because remember the word abuse, it means not using something properly, okay? Alcohol in itself is not the problem, it's the abuse of the alcohol, okay? And so the peaceful solution is not telling you can't drink, it's telling you to drink using self-control, okay? Meaning not to get drunk, okay? Because remember, moral behavior doesn't bring harm, correct? And I've seen a lot of people, even in my own life, lose their life actually drinking, like drinking themselves to death. I remember going to drinking parties in high school where people actually almost died from alcohol poisoning. They drank so much. Okay, it's possible to do that, but it's also possible to slowly kill yourself overdoing alcohol, ruining your liver. There's lots of damage that can be done to your brain, your liver, and other organs from over drinking. Okay, so, remember, it has to be done properly, not abusing alcohol and drugs. Even over-the-counter drugs can be abused. Right now we have an epidemic of opioid overdoses in America. Okay, and those are over-the-counter medications. Anything that we always need to remind ourselves and everyone that medications that are prescribed by a doctor need to be used as prescribed. We shouldn't be self-medicating. I know a lot of people self-medicate. They give themselves, they think, well, this isn't enough, I need more, or this is too much, I need less. You need to ask your doctor. You don't just just change the dosage or, up or down or whatever. You need to follow instructions. It's all about following instructions, okay? But like it says, some families opt to use these alternative source of medicine, the healing medicines like herbs and things, which are really great. Okay, so let's look at the top of page 45. It says, in these families, there is consistency in daily routines. In other words, there's a time for everything, and children know what to expect from day to day. I grew up in that environment. My environment was so tight that we had a bedtime set every night. I remember when I was 8 or 9, it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. We were in bed, and it was so tight that we had our clothes laid out on the end of the bed. So the next morning when we woke up, we already had our clothes picked out and we got dressed for school. It was really, really organized. I told you my dad was a very, very organized person. Okay, and he expected us to be the same way. And we knew when we were going to get showers every night. We knew what time we were going to eat. We knew everything was on a routine. And I appreciate that now, because I've seen a lot of homes where people just do, children just come home, they go to their room, they got everything in their room. They don't even have to come out of their room. There's really no organization. There's no communication with the parents. They just, they're off doing their own thing. Parents are doing their own thing. And they're not really expected to go to bed at any certain time. And I see a lot of children, we see them all the time in school where they got their head on their desk because they're tired. They're tired because they've been up all night. Been up all night in their room playing video games, talking on the phone. Okay? So having this discipline, having this consistency, this routine in your daily life as a child, it's teaching you that responsibility and that discipline that you actually need. Remember, these are positive character traits that are being instilled when our parents do these things. And as a parent, and even as a teacher, we need to be consistent in these things, and sometimes we fall short. I've been late for class at times, but I try to apologize to my students when I am late, and I tell them, hey, I'll let them know that I'm still practicing the peaceful solution too. I'll try to be on time next time. Okay? We always need to be willing and be humble enough to apologize when we make some kind of mistake, or we're not practicing the peaceful solution with our students, so they can see that, yes, we're not perfect, but we have the humility to tell them, yeah, I made a mistake. Okay? I don't think I have any more time. As a matter of fact, I'm out of time, but I think the next class is going to be on Sunday, and I believe that's the 10th. Is it the 10th? The 10th, yeah. The 10th at 5:30 p.m. will be our next class. We'll pick up on the top of page 45 for the next teacher. And thanks, everyone, for coming. You're doing a really great job. Keep up the great work. And we'll see you next time.